At number 10, we have The Garden. Okay, this first one I grabbed off of a website which grabbed it off of Reddit, but they didn't credit the Redditor, so I couldn't find out who the Redditor was. So if you guys know, let me know. The story goes, out in the garden, the girl in the blue dress with butterflies on it stood on her tippy toes, trying to reach one of the pretty things in the tree's branches. When the corpse began to swing at her touch, she laughed merrily. This girl's laughing while she's playing with a dead body. She's either going to be a great doctor or an amazing serial killer, or both. She could do that crossover thing where serial killers also are doctors so they can kill people better in secret. I've seen that all the time. Either way, all the neighborhood kids should stay away from her until she figures out what she wants to be when she grows up. Also, why is she playing with dead bodies with her nice blue dress on? Where are the parents? If you're going to let your kids slap around a corpse in a tree, at least make sure they're not wearing their Sunday best. Throw on some painting overalls and then slap a dead person as much as you like. At number 9, we have bedtime. I begin tucking him into bed. He tells me, "Daddy, check for monsters under my bed." I look underneath for his amusement and see him, another him, under the bed, staring back at me, quivering and whispering, "Daddy, there's somebody on my bed." This one made my hair stand up on end. The feeling that dad would have as he slowly brings his head back up to look at what's sitting on the bed, whatever that thing was, knew that the kid was under the bed, so it was just baiting the father. Classic monster pranks. This thing makes you feel comfortable right before it murders you. At number 8, we have Stuck. This one was written by Garboid27. I can't move, breathe, speak, or hear. It's dark all the time. If I knew it was going to be this lonely, I would have been cremated instead. Ooh. The mystery of what happens after we die is a center point of a lot of human discomfort. Most religions promise you the answer to the afterlife, but do they really know? Part of me is excited to die. I'll never need to worry about running around late for anything ever again. That seems like a peaceful future I can get behind. But what if this short story has it exactly right? What if you're stuck in your body, unconscious, with no ability to do anything forever? At number 7, we have Reflection. This one was written by Redditor The Real Hat Man. I woke up to hear a knocking on the glass. At first I thought it was coming from the window, until I heard it coming from the mirror again. There's so many good horror movies involving mirrors because there's something about them that is inherently creepy. The perfect reflection of yourself stuck in there looking back at you. Some people have encountered paranormal activity where they've said they've looked into a mirror and they could see distorted versions of themselves, or see a ghostly demonic presence behind them. I mean, that could be what's happening in this story, or this mirror person could be knocking on the glass because they're just bored and they just want a friend. You could put a half chessboard up to the mirror and the two of you could play chess for hours and maybe become really good friends. Also, this spirit thing that's knocking on the glass, it did come through at night. Maybe it's trying to wake you up for a booty call. I don't know. Try and stay positive. At number 6, we have Still. This one was sent in by Redditor Horses Everywhere. It sat on my shelf with thoughtless porcelain eyes and the prettiest pink doll dress I could find. Why did she have to be born still? I've heard of things like this actually happening. People keep their stillborn children afterwards because the pain of losing a child was too much to bear, and instead of overcoming the trauma, it manifests itself in strange ways, like dressing them up. I don't know if the person who wrote this story experienced something like this, but this is a story definitely rooted in a dark reality. At number 5, we have Photos. Our next story comes way of Redditor Gustaluz. There was a picture in my phone of me sleeping. I live alone. Sleep creep. Ew. I would just hope if someone's gonna take a picture of me while I'm sleeping, at least make me look cute. Put a filter on it or something. Have some decency. But this is also something that happens all too often. There was a story about a girl in Texas. Her ex-boyfriend broke into her place when she wasn't there and then moved himself into the attic. He would sneak out while she was sleeping and eat her food and take some of her things. When the police found him in the attic, he had a little nest of her belongings around him. On the bright side, that means someone really likes you. I've never really liked anything that much. I mean, like, I love good food, but if it's raining outside and Uber Eats is on surge, then it's Chef Boyardee again, baby. At number 4, we have Security. Working the night shift alone tonight. There's a face in the cellar staring at the security camera. Thank you to HCTET for this story. Way back in the day, I used to work as a security guard, and every time I worked an overnight shift, there would be certain rooms that I would never go into. I didn't care if it was my job. I'm not going to mess around with the ghosts. I don't like it. If I was working late night and I saw a face staring back at me in the security cameras, I would leave. I'm not gonna go investigate. No, that's it. I'm done. No, thank you. I'm gonna leave the property money, and then I'm gonna go to the nearest 24-hour grocery store, do all my shopping, go home, make myself a nice meal, and then watch Netflix. I'll come back in the morning when the demons are asleep. At number 3, we have Welcome Home. This story was written by Madame. This is the perfect follow-up to the last story I just read. You get home tired after a long day's work, ready for a relaxing night alone. You reach for the light switch, but another hand is already there. So the story continues from the last one. I bail on the haunted place I was working, and then when I get home with my groceries, drop them on the floor, there's already someone in my apartment. I think I would just put the groceries down and say, keep them. Then I would drive to a new country and start a new life where no one can bother me. I would change my name to Alfonso Puppuccino and grow a gnarly mustache, and then just live a life where ghosts don't come around and bother me. I don't need that kind of energy in my life. At number 2, we have dreaming. I was having a pleasant dream when what sounded like hammering woke me. After that, I could barely hear the muffled sounds of dirt covering my coffin over my own screams. Thank you to Redditor Vidger Darina for this story. I don't think I could imagine a worse fate than being buried alive. It's like that scene in Kill Bill Volume 2. That's probably the toughest part of the 2 movies for me to watch. Yeah, it's not the people getting their heads chopped off or Lucy Liu losing the top of her skull like someone throwing a hat onto the ice after a hat trick. No, it's being buried alive. That feeling of being confined, not being able to move, and then suffocating to death. That's why you gotta practice your 1-inch wood punch just in case you need to beat your way out of a coffin. And for our number 1 spot, we have Visitors. Our final entry was written by Cobalt Collapse. After working a hard day, I came home to see my girlfriend cradling our child. I didn't know which was more frightening, seeing my dead girlfriend and our stillborn child, or knowing someone had broken into our apartment to place them there. Whoever did this was dedicated. They almost deserve to kill you after that. They're willing to put in so much effort. This person would have had to dig up the body of your dead girlfriend and your dead baby without getting caught, and then put them into a sack and transport them in a car. But first even carry them to the car, then carry them to your place. And if you're not on the ground floor, you better hope the elevator is working. Then they gotta pick the lock to your place, and then they need enough artistic sense to know where to place the bodies in the most horrifying positions. Can't do the bedroom, that's too much of a cliche, but maybe you want to try the bathroom for the surprise, but it might take too long for you to get in there, then the bodies fall apart. This guy is a real workhorse. Alright guys, I'm gonna put one bonus one on here. Day 312. The internet is still not working. That's by Fluffy Poniza. I wanted to do it because it's probably the most modern horror story I could find.
It's just like our number 10, which is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This movie is one of the most popular horror movies of all time and really helped define the slasher genre. All you horror buffs will know who the infamous Leatherface is, and it's not hard to see how he got his name with all that skin on his face. But you might not know his appearance is actually based on the true story of killer Ed Gein. Ed killed his victims between 1954 and 1957, and he wouldn't just wear their skin on his face, he'd also sometimes wear a skin vest. Like when he killed his female victims, he would have a skin vest complete with breasts and female genitalia because he wanted to be like a woman. Yeah, all a little bit creepy. Now if you can stomach the fact that that was true, I hope you can stomach the fact that our number 9 is true, because it's The Hills Have Eyes. This 1977 cult classic and its 2006 remake involve a travelling family who are ambushed and terrorised by savage cannibals as they pass through an area closed to the public. The director, Wes Craven, said he based it on the tale of the 16th century Sawney Bean and his family who lived in a cave in Scotland and ambushed travellers as they passed by. They didn't just rob them though, they actually killed and ate them. Some estimates put the death toll at 1,000 people. Now apparently the family were killed by people before they were actually brought to trial, which is a good thing really, because I don't really want to hear any more of those grisly details. So let's move on to our number 8, which is The Haunting in Connecticut. This movie involves a family being haunted by supernatural beings after they move into a new house in Connecticut in order to be near to the doctor who is treating their son Matt for cancer. The most incredible thing about the movie is how much of it is taken directly from the story of the Snedekers. Their son did have cancer, the house was formerly a funeral home, the mop water as seen in the movie really did turn red, dishes did put themselves away, and the lights flickered constantly no matter what they tried. I bet that family didn't want to go see the movie when it came out in theaters. Anyway guys, let's move on to our number 7, which is also in Connecticut. It's The Conjuring. It's the most recent movie on our list, coming out just 2 years ago in 2013. It's the tale of the Perron family who moved into an old farmhouse in Rhode Island with their 5 daughters. Paranormal activity started to occur when the oldest daughter was attacked by the spirit of an old woman. Paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren concluded that the spirit was that of Bethesda Sherman, who lived in a farmhouse in the 19th century and who locals claim was a witch. Well, the girls who the story is based on, they fully supported the movie. Here's a picture of them here. They said it was all very, very accurate. Alright guys, let's turn up the creepometer now as we move on to our number 6, which is the Amityville Horror. This movie recounts a story of the Lutz family who moved into a house in Amityville in New York where a mass murder had been committed just the year before. After they move in, all kinds of terrifying things start to occur until they are driven out of their home and never return. Well, the Lutz family did exist and they did move into the house where a mass murder had taken place. The killer was Ronald Butch DeFeo, and he actually killed his whole family with a rifle when they were sleeping. You can actually find the house on Google Maps. Yeah, it's really creepy. I don't want to go backwards into the ones we've talked about, guys. Let's move forward into our number 5, which is Child's Play. You've all seen Chucky, and if you haven't, well, I'm sorry I ruined that for you, because this is one creepy possessed doll that causes nothing but misery for the characters. But shockingly, that doll is actually based on something even more creepy. It's based on a boy called Gene who received a doll called Robert from his family's servant when he was 6 years old back in 1906. Apparently the servant was mistreated by the family and put a voodoo spell on Robert. Whatever she did, Robert terrorized Gene and his family for many years. Apparently this doll knocked over furniture, mutilated other toys, and the creepiest thing for me is one time when the family went away on a vacation, the neighbors said they looked up to the window and they could see that the doll was in different places each day. Also, the doll still exists in a museum, so that's like terrifying. Let's move on to our number 4, which is The Girl Next Door. This horrifying movie is about a girl who is left with her aunt and 3 male cousins after her parents die in a car crash. The aunt and her son systematically torture the poor girl through various sadistic methods. Well, sadly, this is based on the true story of Sylvia Likens, who was left alone by her parents with their next door neighbor. When the money to look after them stopped coming in, the neighbor enlisted the help of neighborhood kids to begin torturing Sylvia with beatings, red hot needles, and malnutrition. Alright guys, please stay with me. We're going to move from a nightmare in a house now to a nightmare in a street. It's The Nightmare on Elm Street in at number 3. This movie, directed by Wes Craven, is one of the most famous of all time and tells the story of Freddy Krueger, a terrifying figure who killed kids in their sleep. Well, although he might have existed only in the character's imagination, the story he is based on is very real. Wes Craven came up with the idea after hearing about a group of young, healthy Cambodian immigrants who died in their sleep in LA after being terrified of going back to rest. He said that doctors in the LA hospital heard them screaming and shouting for help, but by the time that doctors actually got there, they were already dead, and the autopsy showed that there was nothing wrong with them physically, which started the whole rumor. Well, if they didn't get killed in real life, maybe they got killed in their dreams. So guys, if these horror stories have taught us anything, is that you should always look for signs, just like the Zodiac Killer in at number 2. This 2007 movie had stars like Jake Gyllenhaal, Mark Ruffalo, and Robert Downey Jr. and told the story of the manhunt for a notorious serial killer who called himself the Zodiac. He killed his victims and left cryptic clues for the police and press to find. Well, one of the reasons the movie was so critically acclaimed around the world was because of how realistic it seemed, and that's because all the events actually happened. The Zodiac Killer was a real serial killer in the San Francisco Bay Area who is linked to at least 5 murders there between 1968 and 1969. Despite the fact that this guy left clues everywhere at all of his murder scenes, it's actually one of the greatest North American unsolved murder mysteries. Let's see if you guys can figure it out. Guys, we've had to face the truth behind witches, dolls, and all kinds of scary things, but it's time to face our inner demon, because our number 1 horror movie that is based on a true story is, and this is my worst, scariest horror movie of all time, The Exorcist. This movie shows us the graphic exorcism of a young girl called Reagan, who becomes possessed and undergoes the most intense exorcism I've ever seen on screen. If you haven't seen it, just don't. It genuinely is horrifying. But what's even more horrifying is that it's actually based on the true story of Roland Doe. Roland is a fake name given by the Catholic Church to a boy who apparently became possessed in 1949 when he was 13 years old, after being contacted by his dead brother through a Ouija board. Basically guys, everything you see that happens to that kid in the Exorcist movie, well, that happened to this kid in real life. Apparently even that horrifying scene with the writing from hell appearing on the skin. Ugh.
Hitchhiking gone seriously wrong drives onto this list at number 10. One of the most common things that we've learned at a young age is to never get in a car with strangers. So I'm not sure how Uber really persuade us to get in cars with strangers, but I guess Uber isn't hitchhiking. You actually know who's driving you, sort of. But I know in certain countries hitchhiking can be completely safe, but in America it's definitely not one of those countries. I know places like in Cuba, I know hitchhiking is almost mandatory, and that's because the transit system there, it just doesn't exist. Well, I'm pretty sure it was in Cuba, but you have to actually pick someone up who's on the road, who's trying to get to work or go to school or something like that. So getting back to this, back on May 19th, 1977, Colleen Stan decided to hitchhike 400 miles from Oregon to California so that she could surprise her friend for her birthday. Colleen was way less than 100 miles away from her final destination when she was picked up by Cameron Hooker. He was a 23-year-old guy who was traveling with his wife and baby when he picked her up, but underneath that family man disguise was a very evil man. He forced Colleen to be his personal sex slave for 7 years. So this guy actually kidnapped her and used her as a personal sex slave for the next 7 years. During that time, she slept in a coffin-like wooden box underneath their waterbed for 23 hours a day and was repeatedly tortured and abused. Colleen wasn't freed until 1984 when the man's wife helped her escape. Cameron Hooker was sentenced to 104 years in prison, and thankfully he won't be out there to pick up any other victims. The girl next door takes us to number 9. Sylvia Likens was only 16 years old when she was abused, and she was murdered by her caregiver Gertrude Benezuski and some of her other neighborhood kids. Gertrude and these other kids, some as young as 10 years old, tortured Sylvia for fun. I mean, these kids sound like future serial killers. The kids would take turns beating her, hitting her against the wall, and choke her until she passes out. Gertrude even put out her cigarettes on her skin, and soon the others joined in too. The abuse gets even more intense, but I won't scar you guys with the details. Just know that these kids are literally so messed up, and I'm sure they're locked behind bars now. Ultimately, Sylvia died due to brain swelling, internal hemorrhaging of the brain, and shock. This is a really sad and depressing story, so let's move on. We have the real life Slender Man who stabs his way into number 8. Slender Man is a tall faceless man who lurks in the shadows. He preys on young children and has even convinced some of them to kill for him. Now that we're familiar with Slender Man, let me introduce you guys to a deranged 12-year-old. In 2014, Morgan had a sleepover, so she invited some of her friends from school. But that night, her plan didn't include eating birthday cake and blowing out candles. Morgan and her friend planned on honoring Slender Man by murdering their friends. The next morning they took their unsuspected friend to the woods and stabbed the poor girl 19 times all over her body. They thought that they brutally murdered her, but thankfully she was discovered by a cyclist who immediately called 911. She had to have a lot of surgeries, but the doctors actually managed to save her life. The girls admitted that they had been planning the attacks for months, so the judge sentenced them to spend a minimum of 25 years in a mental hospital.
Who stabbed her first?
I think Anissa stabbed her first, and then I continued, and then she was like, Morgan, make sure she doesn't escape.
Stranger Things in the Walls breaks onto this list at number 7. Do you sometimes get that weird feeling like you're being watched or someone's watching behind you? Yeah, I get that feeling sometimes. What if I told you that someone could actually be living in your home? Okay, that's not the case for everybody, but for this family in particular, they got a lot more than they bargained for when they did some exploring in their home. A family just moved into their new home and everything seemed normal. However, they made a shocking discovery that will send chills down your spine. When the two young boys were playing around, they discovered a secret door behind a bookshelf in their parents' bedroom. They went down the secret staircase that led to a creepy crawl space, and inside they found evidence that someone was living inside of their walls. They found food wrappers, statues, a key, and some other creepy dolls. Oh, and the candy wrappers were actually actually from candy that the boys stashed in their rooms. So they've been stealing their stuff. And this creepy crawler has just been roaming the house as they sleep. I mean, yeah, after finding that out, good luck sleeping tonight. Hopefully they were able to catch them. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm about to check every wall inside of my place and make sure there's no secret crevices or secret rooms, behind them. Flesh-eating bacteria attacks us in at number 6.
Graduate student is now clinging to life in critical condition. By the time doctors realized what was happening, well, the flesh-decaying infection had already devoured her leg muscles.
Amy Copeland contracted a flesh-eating bacteria when she fell from a homemade zip line. Note to self, never go ziplining on a sketchy homemade course. She went to the hospital where doctors treated her leg with 22 staples and then sent her on her way. But 3 days later, she was rushed to an emergency room in pain. That's when the doctors noticed she had necrotizing fasciitis. Surgeons had to amputate her hands, part of her abdomen, one of her legs, and one foot as well. She was also placed on a ventilator because she had kidney failure and other organ damage. I mean, just imagine going on vacation and wanting to be adventurous, but you end up getting a flesh-eating disease. That might be the worst vacation ever. Mommy Dead and Dearest creeps onto this list at number 5. This is a story about a mother and daughter who appear to be living in a fairy tale life, but in reality they were living in a nightmare. I mean, go back in July of 2016, Gypsy Rose Blanchard was sentenced to 10 years in prison after pleading guilty to second-degree murder in the brutal slaying of her mother. But let me explain. All of her life, Gypsy's mother told her that she was seriously sick and that she won't live to see her 18th birthday. Her mother shaved Gypsy's hair to fake cancer. She made her get a painful feeding tube. She lied to her daughter about how old she was. Gypsy's teeth rotted out. She was forced to take harmful prescription drugs, and she was forced to use a wheelchair and pretended that she was paralyzed from the waist down. This is a serious form of child abuse.
Gypsy was in a wheelchair. She had leukemia, and she was having seizures, and she had to be tube fed.
And then gradually that story fell apart.
Things are not always as they appear. This is a tragic event surrounded by mystery and public deception.
People thought of us as the sweetest mother-daughter, best people in the world.
A horrible hiking accident climbs this list at number 4. This scary story is about Diet Love Pass, who had an incident which is probably one of the creepiest mysteries in Russian history. Back in 1959, 9 students went hiking in the wilderness and they never came out. A search party was sent to find them, but they weren't expecting to see this. They found their campsite, but the tents were cut open from the inside and all of their stuff were untouched. They followed the snowy footprints, and over the course of 2 months, they were able to find all of the bodies. Despite the very cold temperatures, all of the bodies have little clothing on. Some of the bodies had major internal injuries that would be similar to being hit by a car, and what makes things even weirder is that there was no external wounds. One of the bodies has brain damage but zero physical damage to their skull. One woman was missing her tongue, eye, and part of her lips, and some of her facial tissues as well. No one knows what happened on that mountain even to this day. This case is still unsolved. The underground bunker brings us to number 3. Elizabeth Schoaf was approached by a person claiming to be a police officer. She was 14 years old at the time the man handcuffed her and walked her into the woods. He held her captive in an underground bunker that he dug by hand and kept her there for 10 days.
And picked up a piece of ground. And then she realized it was a trap door. There was a bunker down there.
During that time, he abused her many times, but the young girl managed to come up with a plan. She tried to earn his trust and make him believe that she was okay with the situation. She actually convinced him to let her use his cell phone to play games on, but she was actually texting her parents and friends for help. The police were able to find her location and rescue her from this underground bunker.
Go down the ladder and get into the bunker. He had like a rifle and a belt that had guns and handcuffs, and I saw a taser in it, so I knew he was well equipped to do anything if I acted.
Digging into number 2, we have a woman who was buried alive. Is anyone else starting to panic? I think being buried alive would be one of the worst ways to die. But for Michelina, she knew she had to keep on fighting. Well, let's rewind for a sec and go back to the beginning of the story. Michelina was in a very unhealthy and unstable relationship with her fiance Marcin. One day Marcin hired an accomplice and attacked his fiance with a stun gun. He tied up her limbs, put her in a cardboard box, and drove out into the wilderness where he wanted to bury the mother of his child alive. So he dug a shallow grave and put a 90-pound tree branch so that she would suffocate. Once she woke up, she could only think about her son and how she needed to survive so she could protect him. So she cut through the rope with her engagement ring. Well, I guess the ring was good for one thing. And then she clawed herself out of her grave. Even though she managed to escape from this horrifying experience, she is still haunted to this day with severe paranoia and insomnia. Escaping Jeffrey Dahmer takes us to number 1.
Wanted to have the person under my complete control to do with as I wanted.
Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most terrifying and infamous serial killers of all time. He killed and dismembered 17 young men in the late 70s and early 90s. He converted his apartment in Milwaukee into his own personal torture chamber, where he would lure innocent victims and use them for medical experiments, necrophilia, and sometimes he would eat them. One day he invited Tracy Edwards over to drink beer and watch The Exorcist 3, but when Tracy Edwards arrived, he quickly discovered that Jeffrey Dahmer was nothing more than an evil and scary predator. Jeffrey Dahmer used a butcher knife to scare Tracy, and he even said that he was going to eat his heart. Tracy just kept trying to keep calm, and once he was able to distract the killer, he hit him with the blunt object and ran out to the streets. He was able to flag down a police car, which led them to the apartment where they found a ton of body parts, including 4 human heads in the fridge. I mean, what the heck? Well, there you guys have it. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you guys all in the next most amazing top 10 video.
Who stabbed her first?
I think Anissa stabbed her first, and then I continued, and then she was like, Martin, make sure she doesn't escape.
And picked up a piece of ground. And then she realized it was a trap door. There was a bunker down there.